In the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, where manicured lawns stretched like green carpets under the relentless sun, Elena Vasquez found solace in the earth. At 48, she had left the clamor of the city behind, seeking roots in a place that promised community and calm. Her new home, a modest two-story colonial on Elm Street, was her fresh start after years of nursing her ailing mother through a long illness. The house came with a sprawling backyard, overgrown and wild, a blank canvas that whispered possibilities to Elena's weary soul. Elena was no stranger to gardens. Her grandmother, Abuela Rosa, had tended one in the dusty hills of Oaxaca, Mexico, where vibrant blooms tangled with heirloom vegetables, each plant a story etched in soil. As a child, Elena would sit cross-legged amid the marigolds and nopales, listening to tales of ancestors who planted seeds during famines, coaxing life from barren land. La tierra guarda secretos, Abuela would say, her wrinkled hands pressing soil into Elena's palms. The earth keeps secrets. Plant with your heart, and it will bloom for you. Now widowed and childless, Elena poured that inherited passion into her new yard. She ignored the glossy HOA handbook that arrived in her mailbox on moving day, its pages filled with edicts on grass height, fence colors, and aesthetic uniformity. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association prided itself on perfection. Symmetrical flower beds of petunias and boxwoods, no weeds daring to poke through. Elena's garden would be different. It would be alive, untamed, a rebellion wrapped in petals. She began at dawn, her calloused hands digging furrows under the watchful eyes of robins. From seed packets smuggled from her mother's attic, she sowed the old varieties. Crimson zinnias that nodded like flames, purple coneflowers with spiky centers, and tangles of morning glories that climbed the fence like veins. But the heart of it was the heritage plot, a sacred corner dedicated to Abuela's plants. She planted datura, the moonflower with its trumpet blooms that unfurled at night, whispering of ancient rituals. Interwoven were wild herbs, epazote for flavor, damiana for healing teas, and the rare Taguetes lucida, Mexican marigold, whose golden heads were said to guide spirits home during Dia de los Muertos. Weeks blurred into months. Elena's garden exploded into a riot of color, defying the neighborhood's sterile order. Neighbors peeked over fences, murmuring. Mr. Hargrove next door, a retired accountant with a crew-cut lawn, shook his head. "Looks like a jungle," he grumbled to his wife. But Elena didn't care. In the evenings, she sat on her porch swing, sipping chamomile from her own harvest, feeling Abuela's presence in the rustle of leaves. For the first time since her husband's accident 5 years prior, a drunk driver on a rainy night, her heart felt full. The garden wasn't just plants. It was memory made manifest, a bridge to the family she'd lost. One crisp autumn morning, as Elena pruned the datura's thorny stems, a crisp envelope arrived in her mailbox. The HOA seal glared like a badge of authority. Inside, a formal notice. Violation of Aesthetic Standards, Section 4.2. Unauthorized landscaping. Your overgrown and unkempt garden constitutes a visual blight on the community. Remedy within 14 days or face a $5,000 fine. Elena's stomach twisted. $5,000? That was her emergency savings, scraped together from freelance graphic design gigs. She reread the letter, her vision blurring with hot tears. Ugly, they called it. Abuela's legacy reduced to a weed. Trembling, she marched to the HOA office, a squat building at the neighborhood's edge, where President Lydia Beaumont reigned from a desk piled with rule books. Lydia, a sharp-featured woman in her 60s with pearls strung like armor, barely looked up. "Mrs. Vasquez, our community values harmony. Your foliage disrupts the curb appeal. It's not personal, not personal." Elena's voice cracked, echoing in the sterile room. "This garden honors my grandmother, who survived wars and migrations with these plants. It's not foliage. It's history." Lydia's lips thinned. "History belongs in museums, not backyards. Pay the fine or remove it." Back home, Elena collapsed onto the dew-kissed grass, sobs racking her body. The garden, once her sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield. She traced the marigold petals with her fingers, whispering apologies to Abuela's ghost. That night, sleep evaded her. Dreams replayed childhood scenes. Abuela's hands, gnarled but gentle, teaching her to whisper prayers over seeds. Waking to the first light, Elena vowed to fight. She couldn't let them erase her roots. The next days were a whirlwind of defiance. Elena attended the HOA meeting in the community center, a hall buzzing with golf-shirted residents. She stood at the podium, voice steady despite the knot in her throat. This garden isn't ugly. It's alive with stories. These plants are indigenous to Mexico, brought by my ancestors. They've sustained families for generations. Murmurs rippled. Mr. Hargrove snorted. Stories don't pay property values. But a young couple, the Millers, nodded sympathetically. Sarah Miller, a botanist at the local university, slipped Elena her card afterward. I'd love to see it. Sounds fascinating. Emboldened, Elena invited Sarah over. As they wandered the path, Sarah's eyes widened. These aren't common cultivars. The Taggart's lucida. It's a rare heirloom strain. And the datura? That variety hasn't been documented locally. She knelt, photographing leaves. This could be more than a garden. Word spread. A local newspaper reporter, tipped off by Sarah, arrived with a camera. HOA versus Heritage Suburban Showdown, the headline blared. Elena's story tugged at heartstrings. Widow fights for grandmother's memory. Sympathy poured in. Emails from strangers, flowers from neighbors. Even Mr. Hargrove left a tentative casserole on her porch, but the HOA doubled down. Another letter. Fine upheld. Removal imminent. Desperation clawed at Elena. She pawned her wedding ring for legal fees, consulting a pro bono attorney who specialized in property rights. It's a long shot, the lawyer said, but if there's historical value, the city might intervene. In a feverish search through Abuela's old journals, unearthed from dusty boxes, Elena uncovered clues. Yellowed pages detailed the plant's journey. Smuggled seeds from Oaxaca in the 1920s, planted in California during the Bracero era. One entry mentioned a unique hybrid, the Rosa's Whisper, a datura marigold cross that bloomed under moonlight, rumored to have medicinal properties lost to time. Sarah's analysis confirmed it. This strain is genetically unique, she emailed. It matches descriptions from 19th century ethnobotanical records. Your garden preserves a piece of cultural heritage. Elena submitted the evidence to the city's Historic Preservation Board. Days stretched into agony. She tended the garden at night, fearing bulldozers, her tears watering the soil. Memories flooded. Abuela's deathbed, frail but fierce, pressing a marigold seed into Elena's hand. Plant it, Mika. Let it live for us. The board meeting arrived like a storm. Elena sat in the echoing chamber, heart pounding as experts testified. A historian from the state archive spoke. This garden replicates plantings from the Mexican migration waves. It's a living artifact valued at over $500,000 for its botanical and cultural significance. Lydia Beaumont, summoned as a witness, blanched. The board deliberated behind closed doors. When they emerged, the chairman's voice boomed. We designate Elena Vasquez's garden a historic landmark. All encroachments void, the room erupted. Elena's knees buckled. Sarah hugged her tight. The next day, the fine was rescinded and the city appraised the landmark at $500,000. Insurance against threats, a fund for preservation. Willow Creek transformed. Neighbors planted wildflowers. The HOA revised rules to honor diversity. In the garden's glow, Elena stood tall, petals dancing in the breeze. Abuela's secrets had bloomed into victory, roots deeper than any fine could sever. The sun hung low over Willow Creek, casting golden fingers through the tangled vines of Elena Vasquez's garden, now a newly minted historic landmark. The air buzzed with the hum of bees and the faint cheers of victory, but Elena's heart still carried the weight of the battle. The city's designation had saved her garden from the HOA's bulldozers, but it had also thrust her quiet life into a spotlight she hadn't sought. Reporters lingered at her gate, neighbors whispered in cul-de-sacs, and the garden, her sacred refuge, felt less like home and more like a public exhibit. Elena knelt by the heritage plot, her fingers brushing the velvety leaves of the Taggart's lucida. The Mexican marigolds glowed under the dusk, their golden heads swaying as if nodding approval. She whispered to them as Abuela Rosa had taught her, a prayer for strength. The $500,000 valuation from the city was a shield, but it came with strings, meetings with preservationists, requests for tours, and whispers of grants to maintain the garden as a community asset. Elena wanted none of it. She wanted her mornings back, her solitude, the quiet communion with her grandmother's memory. Yet Willow Creek was changing. The morning after the landmark ruling, Sarah Miller, the botanist who'd championed Elena's cause, arrived with a thermos of coffee and a notebook thick with ideas. "This isn't just your garden anymore," Sarah said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "It's a catalyst. People are talking about native plants, cultural heritage. We could start a community program, teach kids about these species, their history." Elena hesitated, her spade paused mid-dig. "I just wanted to grow my flowers, Sarah, not start a movement." Sarah's smile softened. "I know, but movements find you sometimes." The idea took root slowly, like a seedling breaking through clay. Elena agreed to a small workshop, hosted in her backyard for the neighborhood kids. The first Saturday, a dozen children, ages 6 to 12, spilled across her lawn, their sneakers trampling the grass as they gawked at the towering datura and sniffed the spicy episode. Elena, nervous at first, found her rhythm telling stories, abuela's stories, of how the nopales fed families when crops failed, how the moonflowers were planted to honor the dead. The kids listened, wide-eyed, as she showed them how to press seeds into soil, their small hands mimicking her own. One girl, Mia, a shy 10-year-old from down the street, lingered after the others left. Her dark braids swung as she clutched a potted marigold. "My abuela had a garden too," she whispered. "In Guatemala. She died last year." Elena's throat tightened. She knelt, meeting Mia's gaze. "Plant this for her," she said, pressing the pot into the girl's hands. "Tell her stories when it blooms." Mia's nod was solemn, a pact between them. From that moment, Elena saw the garden through new eyes, not just as her own sanctuary, but as a bridge for others too. But not everyone in Willow Creek was swayed by the landmark status. Lydia Beaumont, the HOA president, hadn't attended the city's ruling, but her presence loomed. At the next HOA meeting, held in the community center's fluorescent lit hall, Lydia stood at the podium, her pearls gleaming like a warning. "The board respects the city's decision," she said, her voice clipped. "But we must ensure this. Precedent doesn't erode our standards. We're drafting new guidelines to balance heritage with harmony." The room stirred. Mr. Hargrove, the accountant next door, raised a hand. "What's that mean for my roses?" "They're heritage, too. English climbers, been in my family since the 40s. Lydia's lips pursed. "We'll review on a case-by-case basis." Elena, seated in the back, felt her pulse quicken. The victory wasn't final. It was a ceasefire. She glanced at Sarah, who scribbled notes furiously. "They're scared," Sarah whispered. "Your garden's forcing them to rethink everything." That night, Elena pored over Abuela's journals again, seeking wisdom in the faded ink. One entry stood out, written in 1963. "The land fights for those who fight for it. When they came for our fields, we planted in secret. They cannot uproot what is meant to grow." Elena traced the words, feeling Abuela's defiance kindle her own. She wouldn't let Lydia's new rules choke her garden spirit. The next morning, a stranger knocked on Elena's door, a wiry man in a tweed jacket, introducing himself as Dr. Emilio Torres, a cultural historian from the State University. Sarah had sent him. "Your garden's a living archive," he said, adjusting his glasses as he surveyed the heritage plot. "The Roses Whisper hybrid? It's mentioned in oral histories from Oaxaca, tied to indigenous healing practices. We'd like to nominate it for a national registry." Elena's chest swelled with pride, but doubt crept in. "What does that mean for me? More people traipsing through my yard?" Dr. Torres chuckled. "Possibly, but also protection, federal grants, legal weight. No HOA could touch it then." The idea of federal recognition was daunting, but Elena agreed to let Dr. Torres document the garden. Over the next weeks, he and Sarah became fixtures cataloging plants, cross-referencing Abuela's journals with historical records. They uncovered more. The datura strain traced back to a 19th century curandera, a healer who used it in rituals for the grieving. The garden wasn't just Elena's. It was a thread in a tapestry stretching centuries. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to shift. The Millers replaced their petunias with native milkweed, attracting monarch butterflies that danced over fences. Mia's family planted a small plot of corn and beans, a nod to their Guatemalan roots. Even Mr. Hargrove, grumbling but curious, asked Elena for advice on growing lavender that could withstand the heat. The garden was no longer a solitary rebellion. It was a spark igniting small acts of defiance against the HOA's sterile vision. But Lydia Beaumont wasn't done. One gray morning, Elena found a new notice taped to her mailbox. Proposed amendment to HOA bylaws. All landscaping, including designated landmarks, must conform to aesthetic review every 6 months. Non-compliance fines up to $10,000. The fine print cited community standards and property value protection. Elena's hands shook as she read it. $10,000? She'd already pawned her ring. Her savings were drained from legal fees. She called Sarah, who arrived with Dr. Torres in tow. "This is retaliation," Sarah said, pacing the kitchen. "They can't override a city landmark, but they can make your life hell with inspections." Dr. Torres nodded. "We need to go bigger. The National Registry nomination is a start, but we should apply for a cultural heritage grant. It comes with legal protections and funding, enough to fight the HOA in court if needed." Elena felt the weight of it all, the garden, the community, the fight. She wanted to retreat to hide among her flowers, but Abuela's voice echoed, "They cannot uproot what is meant to grow." She agreed to the grant application, though it meant opening her garden to more scrutiny, more strangers. Dr. Torres promised to handle the paperwork, but Elena had to prepare for a public hearing, where the neighborhood would vote on the HOA's amendment. The hearing was set for a chilly November evening. Elena spent the day in the garden, pruning, weeding, whispering to the plants. Mia stopped by, her marigold now blooming in a pot on her porch. "I told my abuela stories to it," she said shyly. "It feels like she's listening." Elena hugged her, tears pricking her eyes. "She is, Mia. She's always listening." At the community center, the crowd was larger than ever. Neighbors, reporters, even a film crew from a local station. Lydia presented the amendment with icy precision, citing community cohesion. Then Elena took the podium, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "This garden isn't just mine," she said, holding up one of Abuela's journals. "It's a piece of history, of families who carried seeds across borders, who planted hope in hard times. If you find it, you find our stories." Sarah followed, presenting data on the garden's ecological value, pollinators, soil health. Dr. Torres spoke of its cultural weight, reading from indigenous records. Mia, trembling but brave, stood and said, "Miss Elena's garden makes me feel like my abuela is still here." The vote was close, but the amendment failed. Cheers erupted. Lydia's face was stone. That night Elena sat in her garden, moonlight bathing the roses' whisper. The fight wasn't over, but she felt Abuela's hand on her shoulder, guiding her forward. The moon hung heavy over Willow Creek, its silver light spilling across Elena Vasquez's garden, where the roses whispered datura glowed like tiny lanterns. The victory at the HOA hearing had quieted the immediate threat to her historic landmark, but Elena felt no peace. The garden, once her private refuge, was now a symbol, a beacon for some, a battleground for others. Neighbors waved as they passed her fence, their smiles warm but heavy with expectation. Reporters called daily, seeking quotes for follow-up stories. And the city's preservation board sent emails about community engagement plans, urging Elena to host more workshops, open her gates wider. She wanted to say no. She wanted to sit alone with her marigolds, to whisper to Abuela Rosa's spirit without an audience. But the garden had grown bigger than her, its roots entwining with the lives around her. Mia, the shy girl who'd planted a marigold for her own grandmother, now visited daily, her small hands eager to learn. Sarah Miller, the botanist, was drafting a proposal for a community garden inspired by Elena's, with native plants and heritage seeds. Even Mr. Hargrove, the gruff accountant next door, had started asking questions about soil pH. His English roses now sharing space with wild sage. Yet the HOA, led by the unyielding Lydia Beaumont, hadn't surrendered. The failed amendment was a setback, not a defeat. Rumors swirled of a new strategy. Legal loopholes, petitions to the city to limit the landmark's scope. Lydia's allies, a tight-knit group of older residents who prized Willow Creek's polished uniformity, whispered at coffee shops about property value risks and outsider influence. Elena felt their stares when she walked to the mailbox, their judgment sharp as pruning shears. One frosty December morning, as Elena knelt to mulch the episode, a new letter arrived. Not from the HOA this time, but from the city's Historic Preservation Board. Her heart sank as she read, "As a designated landmark, your property is eligible for a federal cultural heritage grant. A site visit is scheduled for January 10, 2026, to assess the garden's condition and community impact." Please prepare a presentation on its historical significance. Elena's hands trembled. A grant could mean funds to protect the garden. Legal fees, maintenance costs, maybe even enough to buy back her pawned wedding ring. But a site visit meant scrutiny, bureaucracy, strangers trampling her sacred space. She called Dr. Emilio Torres, the cultural historian who'd championed her garden's nomination to the National Registry. "What do they want from me?" she asked, her voice tight. "They want to see the garden story," Emilio said over the phone, his tone calm but urgent. "Not just the plants, but what they mean to you, to Willow Creek, to history. This is your chance to make the garden untouchable, Elena. If the feds recognize it, no HOA can challenge it." The weight of his words settled like frost. Elena spent the next days digging deeper into Abuela's journals, piecing together a narrative. The pages revealed more than she'd expected. Sketches of the Rose's Whisper hybrid, notes on its use in healing fevers during the 1918 flu pandemic, even a faded photograph of Abuela's mother standing proud in a California field, surrounded by the same moonflowers now blooming in Elena's yard. The garden wasn't just personal. It was a living record of survival, migration, and resilience. Sarah and Emilio helped prepare for the site visit. Sarah compiled data on the garden's ecological benefits, its role in supporting pollinators, its drought-resistant species. Emilio translated Abuela's journals into a timeline, linking the plants to indigenous practices and Mexican-American history. Mia, now a regular helper, painted signs for the garden paths: Abuela's marigolds, Moonflower Haven, healing herbs. Her enthusiasm was infectious, but Elena's stomach churned with doubt. What if the officials saw only weeds like Lydia did? The night before the visit, a storm rolled in. Rain battered the garden, wind tearing at the delicate datura blooms. Elena stayed up past midnight, wrapping burlap around the most fragile plants, her flashlight cutting through the downpour. She thought of Abuela's journal entry from 1942. "The rain tried to drown us, but we planted anyway. The earth remembers the stubborn." By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the garden glistening, its colors sharper against the gray sky. The site visit brought 3 officials, 2 from the Federal Preservation Office and 1 from the State Botanical Society. Elena, dressed in her mother's old shawl for courage, led them through the garden, her voice steady as she recounted Abuela's stories. She pointed to the Tagates lucida, explaining its role in Dia de los Muertos rituals. She showed them the Rose's Whisper, its petals still damp but radiant. Emilio presented the historical evidence, Sarah the ecological data. Mia, unprompted, piped up, "These flowers keep my Abuela's memory alive too." The officials nodded, scribbling notes, their faces unreadable. As they left, the lead inspector, a woman with kind eyes, said, "This is more than a garden, Mrs. Vasquez, it's a legacy." Elena exhaled, but the relief was fleeting. That afternoon, Lydia Beaumont appeared at her gate, her expression colder than the January air. "Don't think this is over," she said, clutching a clipboard. "The HOA is filing a petition to rezone your property. Landmark or not, will ensure Willow Creek stays cohesive." Elena's blood ran cold. "Rezone? You can't just—" "We can," Lydia cut in. "Your garden's a public spectacle now. That changes things. Property lines, tax codes, we'll find a way." Alone that evening, Elena sat on her porch swing, the creak of wood her only company. The garden glowed under the stars, but fear gnawed at her. Rezoning could mean new restrictions, higher taxes, or worse, forced sale. She thought of selling the house, fleeing the fight. But the marigold seemed to whisper back, "Stay, fight." She called a meeting with her allies: Sarah, Emilio, Mia's parents, even Mr. Hargrove, who'd become an unlikely supporter after his sage thrived. They gathered in her kitchen, maps and legal documents spread across the table. Emilio suggested a counter-petition, rallying the neighborhood to protect the garden's status. Sarah proposed a public campaign: articles, social media, a festival to celebrate the garden's heritage. Mia's father, a quiet carpenter named Javier, offered to build a small gazebo for community events free of charge. The plan took shape: the Willow Creek Heritage Festival, set for early spring. It would showcase the garden, invite local historians, and let neighbors plant their own heritage seeds. Elena hesitated. She hated crowds, but Mia's eager eyes and Sarah's conviction swayed her. "This is how we win," Sarah said. "Not just for you, but for everyone who's ever felt their roots don't belong." Preparations consumed the next weeks. Elena taught more workshops, her backyard alive with children's laughter and neighbors' curiosity. The Millers donated seeds. Mr. Hargrove lent his pickup for supplies. Even the local paper, once skeptical, ran a feature. From fine to celebrated, Elena's garden redefines community. Posts on X spread the story, with hashtags like Chalmers Save Elena's Garden trending locally. But Lydia's petition gained traction too. At a tense town hall, she presented her case. The garden's landmark status inflated property taxes, strained HOA resources. A few residents nodded, worried about their wallets. Elena countered, voice trembling but firm. This garden isn't a burden. It's a gift. It's teaching our kids where they come from. The crowd was split, but hope flickered. Mia's family hosted a seed-sharing event, drawing dozens. Mr. Hargrove, now a convert, spoke up. My roses were my history. Elena's garden is hers. Let's stop fighting what makes us different. As spring approached, the festival loomed, a make-or-break moment. Elena walked her garden at dawn, the roses whisper unfurling under the first light. Abuela's words echoed. The earth remembers the stubborn. Whatever came next, rezoning, petitions, or crowds, Elena was ready. Her garden had rooted her to something bigger, and she wouldn't let it go. The first buds of spring pushed through the soil in Elena Vasquez's garden, a quiet promise amid the storm brewing in Willow Creek. The air carried the scent of damp earth and blooming damiana. But Elena's heart was heavy with the weight of the upcoming Willow Creek Heritage Festival. It was her last stand to protect her historic landmark garden from the HOA's rezoning petition, led by the relentless Lydia Beaumont. The festival, set for the first Saturday in April, was less than 2 weeks away, and Elena felt the eyes of the neighborhood, and beyond, fixed on her backyard. The garden itself seemed to sense the stakes. The rose's whispered datura unfurled its ghostly blooms earlier than usual, their fragrance mingling with the marigold's earthy tang. Elena spent her mornings tending the plants, her hands steady despite the knot in her chest. She whispered to Abuela Rosa's spirit, seeking courage. I'm trying, Abuela. I'm trying to make you proud. The marigolds nodded back, their golden heads catching the dawn. Preparations for the festival consumed Willow Creek. Sarah Miller, the botanist, coordinated with local schools to bring students for planting. Workshops, Dr. Emilio Torres secured a guest speaker, a renowned ethnobotanist from Oaxaca, to lecture on the cultural significance of Elena's plants. Javier, Mia's father, worked late into the nights, his hammer echoing as he built a cedar gazebo in the garden's heart, its beams carved with floral motifs. Even Mr. Hargrove, once the neighborhood's staunchest critic, donated folding chairs and a banner reading Willow Creek Blooms. But Lydia's shadow loomed. Her rezoning petition had gained signatures, mostly from older residents who feared rising taxes or resented the garden's fame. At a coffee shop, Elena overheard whispers. It's a nice story, but why should we pay for her hobby? The words stung, but Elena pressed on, fueled by Mia's daily visits. The 10-year-old had taken to naming each marigold in her pot. Rosa, Luz, Esperanza, her small voice weaving new stories into the garden's tapestry. One chilly evening, as Elena and Sarah hung fairy lights along the garden paths, a stranger arrived at the gate. He was young, maybe 30, with a camera slung around his neck and a badge identifying him as Caleb Ruiz, a documentary filmmaker from Los Angeles. I read about your garden on X, he said, his eyes scanning the vibrant chaos of blooms. It's more than a landmark, it's a movement. I want to film it for a short doc, maybe pitch it to festivals. Elena hesitated. Her garden was already a spectacle. A film would draw more eyes, more pressure. But Sarah nudged her. This could amplify your story, Elena. Reach people beyond Willow Creek. Reluctantly, Elena agreed. Caleb spent days filming, his lens capturing the sway of moonflowers, Mia's careful tending of her marigold, and Elena's weathered hands turning soil. He interviewed neighbors, coaxing out their stories. Javier spoke of his Guatemalan roots, Mr. Hargrove of his grandmother's rose garden in England. The footage wove a narrative of community, of roots reclaiming space in a sterile suburb, but trouble brewed. A week before the festival, Elena found a new notice taped to her mailbox, this time from the city's zoning board. Public hearing, petition to rezone 142 Elm Street. April 15, 2026. The date was a week after the festival, a deliberate jab. Lydia's petition claimed the garden's landmark status unduly burdened the neighborhood, proposing a reclassification that could strip its protections and open the land to stricter HOA control. Or worse, commercial development. Elena's knees buckled. She called Emilio, who arrived with a stack of legal books. "This is a scare tactic," he said, adjusting his glasses. "The feds are reviewing the grant. The city can't rezone a landmark without their approval, but we need to pack the hearing with supporters. The festival is your stage. Show them what this garden means." The days blurred into a frenzy. Elena barely slept, her nights spent rehearsing her speech for the festival's opening. Caleb's camera followed her, capturing her exhaustion and resolve. Sarah rallied local businesses, securing food trucks and a mariachi band. Mia's school designed posters, their crayon-drawn flowers plastered across Willow Creek. Posts on X exploded, with our Willow Creek blooms trending nationally, drawing attention from environmentalists and cultural activists. The morning of the festival dawned crisp and clear. Elena's garden transformed into a vibrant stage, tables lined with seed packets, paths marked with Mia's signs, the gazebo gleaming under the sun. Hundreds arrived, neighbors, strangers, even a busload of students from a nearby college. The ethnobotanist from Oaxaca, Dr. Sofia Morales, spoke first, her voice carrying over the crowd. "This garden is a living archive of indigenous knowledge, a testament to survival across borders." Elena took the stage next, her mother's shawl draped over her shoulders. Her voice wavered at first, then grew strong. "This isn't just my garden," she said, holding up Abuela's journal. "It's my grandmother's dreams, my neighbors' stories, our children's future. These plants have seen wars, migrations, loss. They're still here. So are we." The crowd erupted, their applause drowning out the distant hum of traffic. Mia led a group of kids in planting a new row of marigolds, their laughter mingling with the mariachi's strums. Mr. Hargrove, his face softer than Elena had ever seen, handed out sage cuttings from his own yard. Even some of Lydia's allies attended, their expressions torn between curiosity and unease. But Lydia herself was absent, her absence a silent threat. That night, as volunteers cleaned up, Caleb showed Elena a rough cut of his footage on his laptop. The images were breathtaking. The garden's colors pulsing, Mia's shy smile, Elena's hands cradling a moonflower. "This could change things," Caleb said. "I'm submitting it to Sundance." Elena nodded, overwhelmed. The festival had raised funds, enough to cover legal fees for the zoning hearing. But as she locked the gate, a chill ran through her. Lydia's petition wasn't about aesthetics anymore. It was personal, a vendetta against the change Elena's garden represented. The zoning hearing arrived too soon. The community center was packed, standing room only. Lydia spoke first, her voice smooth as ice. "This garden, while charming, disrupts our community's stability. Rezoning ensures fairness for all residents." Her supporters clapped, but their numbers seemed smaller. Elena stood, her heart pounding. She spoke of Abuela, of the plant's journey, of the festival's proof that the garden united rather than divided. Sarah presented ecological data. Emilio cited federal protections. Mia, clutching her marigold pot, said simply, "This garden makes me feel home." The board deliberated for hours. When they returned, the chairwoman's voice was firm. "The petition is denied. The landmark status stands with federal grant approval pending." Cheers erupted. Elena sagged against Sarah, tears streaming. That night, in the garden's quiet embrace, Elena lit a candle for Abuela. The rose's whisper glowed, its petals catching the flame's flicker. The fight wasn't over. Lydia might try again, and the grant brought new responsibilities, but Elena felt rooted, unbreakable. The garden had woven Willow Creek into something new, a tapestry of stories blooming against the odds.